Warm champagne in my glass tasted like battery acid when my father finally grabbed his microphone. I wasn't supposed to draw attention at my sister's wedding, but he raised his glass, looked dead at me, and called me a family disgrace. Seconds later, my cracked phone vibrated with one message. The air inside the Oak Ridge Country Club was heavy, thick with the conflicting scents of roasted lamb, wilting white peonies, and expensive, stale perfume. It was the kind of air that clung to the back of your throat. I sat at table 14, pushed so far back into the corner of the ballroom that every time the kitchen's swinging doors opened, a draft of hot, dishwater-scented air hit the nape of my neck. It was fitting. Beatrice, my older sister, was at the head table on a raised dais, literally looking down on the rest of us in a cloud of imported Italian silk and hand-stitched lace. I was by the kitchen, wearing a navy blue dress I had bought on clearance, the cheap synthetic lining itching furiously against my ribs. I pushed a pale, overly buttered fondant potato around my porcelain plate with the tines of my fork. Clink, scrape, clink. The sound was entirely drowned out by the low, continuous hum of 300 wealthy people networking under the guise of celebrating love. My mother, Evelyn, caught my eye from across the room. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the severe, practiced tightening of her jaw. She gave me a brief, microscopic shake of her head, a silent command to stop playing with my food, to sit up straight, to pretend I belonged here. I dropped the fork. It hit the plate with a dull thud. I was the black sheep, not the fun, rebellious kind who rode motorcycles and had interesting tattoos. I was the disappointing kind. The kind who had dropped out of a prestigious law school 3 years ago to sit in a cramped, unventilated basement apartment, writing code and building a data encryption startup that my parents dismissively referred to as my little computer repair hobby. To Thomas and Evelyn, success was tangible. It was a corner office at a legacy law firm. It was a summer house in Cape Cod. It was marrying a man like Colin B's new husband, a private wealth manager with a jawline that looked like it was carved out of marble and hands that were always slightly, nervously sweaty. I had none of those things. I was 28, technically broke on paper, and driving a sedan with a fractured muffler. "So, Quinn," Uncle Gregory boomed from across our table. He was a man who spoke entirely in shouts, his face perpetually flushed from high blood pressure and scotch. "Still doing the tech thing? Fixing hard drives?" I looked up, forcing my facial muscles into something resembling a polite smile. "Something like that, Uncle Greg. I build security architecture." He waved a meaty hand, dismissing the distinction. Right. Well, keep at it. Not everyone can be a high flyer like B. The world needs people in the background." I didn't answer. I reached for my water glass. The condensation had pooled at the base, and when I lifted it, a heavy drop fell onto the white linen tablecloth, spreading into a dark, damp circle. I kept my eyes fixed on that spreading stain, willing the hours to pass, willing the evening to end so I could go back to my dark apartment, boot up my monitors, and disappear into lines of logic where things actually made sense. Up on the dais, a microphone let out a sharp, ear-piercing squeal. The low hum of conversation instantly died, replaced by the rustle of silk and the shifting of chairs as 300 heads turned toward the sound. My father was standing. Thomas was a tall man who wore his authority like a tailored suit. He tapped the side of his champagne flute with a silver spoon. "Ding, ding, ding. Family, friends, colleagues," he began, his voice a rich, practiced baritone that easily filled the cavernous room. "We are gathered here to celebrate perfection." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. He turned to look at B, who was practically glowing, her hand resting delicately over Colin's. "Beatrice has always been our light. From the day she was born, she understood what it meant to carry our family name. Excellence isn't just an expectation for her. It is her baseline." He smiled, a warm, paternal expression that I hadn't seen directed at me in over a decade. "And today, she marries Colin, a man of equal ambition, equal standing, and impeccable character." Polite applause rippled through the room. I clapped, the sound hollow against my own palms. "You know," my father continued, his tone shifting, dropping an octave into something more conversational, more conspiratorial. "Raising children is an exercise in contrasts. It teaches you the duality of life." My stomach tightened. A cold, hard stone of dread dropped into my gut. I knew that pivot. I knew the cadence of his voice when he was about to deliver a punchline. You see, for every success, there is a struggle. For every step forward, there is a stumble. He wasn't looking at B anymore. His eyes were scanning the room, panning over the sea of faces, tracking toward the back, toward table 14, toward the kitchen doors. We raise our children with the same opportunities, the same roof, the same love, he said, his voice dripping with a sickly sweet melancholy. But they make their own choices. We have our golden girl, Beatrice. And then, he found me. His gaze locked onto mine. The room seemed to hold its breath. And then we have Quinn, our own personal cautionary tale. A few people chuckled, assuming it was a self-deprecating family joke, but my father didn't smile. Every family has one, don't they? He continued, leaning into the microphone, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The one who squanders potential, the one who abandons duty for foolish pride. You look at Beatrice, and you see the best of us. You look at Quinn, and well, you see the family disgrace. Let's be honest. It's a harsh word, but honesty is a virtue, isn't it? The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of anticipation, it was the suffocating, heavy silence of collective discomfort. The chuckles died instantly. No one looked at me, which was somehow worse than if they had all turned to stare. They were looking at their plates, at their glasses, suddenly fascinated by the silverware. My father raised his glass high. To Beatrice and Colin, may your future be as bright as you are, and may you never forget the legacy you are bound to uphold. To Beatrice and Colin, the room echoed, a muttered, disjointed chorus. I sat completely still. The cheap synthetic fabric of my dress felt like it was shrinking, wrapping around my lungs, cutting off the oxygen. I could feel the heat radiating from my own cheeks, a burning, humiliating flush that crawled up my neck. I looked at the head table. My mother was taking a measured sip of her champagne, her face a mask of serene indifference. B was picking a non-existent piece of lint off her Vera Wang gown. She didn't look up. Of course she didn't. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply pressed my hands flat against the table. The linen was still damp from my water glass. The moisture seeped into my cuticles, a small, grounding sensation of cold reality amidst the surreal nightmare of the room. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the polished hardwood floor. In the quiet aftermath of the toast, the sound cracked through the air like a whip. A few heads snapped in my direction, eyes wide, pity mingling with morbid curiosity. I ignored them. I stood up, keeping my spine rigid, and turned my back on the ballroom. I walked past table 12, past table 8, weaving through the maze of white linen and flickering centerpieces. I could hear the whispered fragments as I passed. Can't believe Thomas said that. Well, she did drop out. Poor girl. The pity was worse than the insult. The pity meant they believed him. I pushed through the heavy mahogany double doors leading to the lobby. The jazz band had started up again in the ballroom, the muffled, thumping bass vibrating through the soles of my cheap heels. I kept walking until I reached the women's restroom at the far end of the corridor. I shoved the door open and locked it behind me. The bathroom was an oasis of cold, unfeeling marble and harsh, buzzing fluorescent light. It smelled sharply of bleach and expensive lavender soap. I walked over to the sink, gripping the edge of the porcelain so tightly my knuckles went white. I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My mascara had smudged slightly under my left eye. My hair, which I had spent 2 hours trying to curl into soft waves, was already falling flat, clinging limply to my collarbones. I looked exactly like what my father had called me, a failure, a tired, faded smudge of a person standing in the shadow of perfection. The family, disgrace. The words echoed in the tiled room, bouncing off the mirrors. A sudden, violent wave of nausea hit me. I turned on the cold water, letting it run over my wrists, staring at the swirling drain. Why had I come? Why had I subjected myself to this? I knew who they were. I knew what they thought of me. I had deluded myself into thinking that playing the dutiful sister for one night would grant me a temporary amnesty. I reached for a paper towel. It was rough, scraping against the delicate skin under my eyes as I wiped away the smeared makeup. Deep in the recesses of my cheap faux leather clutch resting on the counter, my phone vibrated. It was a sharp, angry buzz against the marble. I ignored it. It was probably a notification from a food delivery app or an automated text from my cellular provider telling me my data was running low. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the air past the tight knot in my throat. I needed to leave. I would slip out the side door, call a cab, and go home. I would never speak to Thomas or Evelyn again. The phone vibrated again, then a third time. A rapid, urgent succession of bursts. I sighed, unclasped the clutch, and pulled out the phone. The glass screen was cracked diagonally across the center, a souvenir from a sleepless night 3 months ago when I had dropped it on my basement floor. I swiped the screen awake. 3 new text messages. All from Elliot. Elliot was my co-founder. He was brilliant, socially awkward, and ruthlessly efficient. He didn't text unless a server was on fire or we were being sued. I opened the thread. Elliot. The ink is dry. Citadel just closed the acquisition. Elliot. Wire cleared escrow 5 minutes ago. You are officially liquid for $42 million, post-tax. Elliot. Also, per your strict instructions, I executed the secondary purchase through the Shell LLC. We bought the distressed debt portfolio from Vanguard. The paper on your father's firm and the lien on his primary estate are now completely in your name. He defaulted on the latest covenant at 5 p.m. today. You are his primary creditor. What's the play? I stopped breathing. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights suddenly sounded deafening. I read the messages again. Then a third time. I traced the words with my index finger, dragging it over the crack in the glass, feeling the slight, sharp edge of the fracture. $42 million. You are his primary creditor. For the last 2 years, I had known my father's law firm was bleeding money. He had made terrible investments, over-leveraged his assets, and borrowed heavily against the family estate to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. I knew this because my little computer repair hobby specialized in deep web financial data architecture. I had seen the crumbling foundation of his empire long before the banks did. When Citadel, a massive global tech conglomerate, had approached Elliot and me to buy out our encryption algorithm, I had asked Elliot to do something reckless. I told him to take a portion of my eventual buyout and quietly purchase my father's distressed debt through a blind holding company. I hadn't done it to save him. I hadn't done it to ruin him. I had done it because I wanted the one thing Thomas respected: leverage. I looked up at the mirror again. The woman staring back at me didn't look like a faded smudge anymore. The flush of humiliation in my cheeks was receding, replaced by a cold, pale stillness. The tightness in my chest uncoiled, slithering away into the drain with the cold tap water. I wasn't the family disgrace. I was the family landlord. A strange, dark thrill curled in the pit of my stomach, fighting a brief, fleeting wave of sorrow. The sorrow was for the father I had wished for, a father who might have loved me unconditionally. The thrill was for the father I actually had, a man who was about to learn exactly how much his cruelty cost. I typed a reply to Elliot. My thumbs moved smoothly, without a tremor. Quinn. Draft the foreclosure notices. Have the couriers ready for Monday morning. Let's burn it down. I locked the phone and dropped it back into my clutch. The clasp snapped shut with a satisfying metallic click. I didn't need to sneak out the side door anymore. I needed to go back to the party. I had a wedding cake to eat. The heavy mahogany doors felt lighter when I pushed them open the second time. The jazz band was playing an upbeat, frantic tempo now, a jarring contrast to the thick, oppressive atmosphere of the ballroom. As I stepped back onto the fraying edges of the rented floral carpet, I realized the room hadn't changed. The ice sculptures were still dripping into their silver trays. The air still smelled of roasted meat and wilting peonies, but the illusion was broken. I wove through the tables, moving with a strange, liquid grace I didn't know I possessed. The nervous shuffling and averted eyes of the guests didn't burn my skin anymore. I looked at the sea of tailored suits and silk gowns, and all I saw were ledgers, liabilities, debt. I took my seat at table 14. My fondant potato was right where I left it, congealed in a puddle of cold butter. Thought you might have bolted, Uncle Gregory muttered, not looking up from his scotch. His voice lacked its previous boom. It was flat, tinged with a sudden, uncomfortable wariness. Why would I leave? I asked, keeping my voice mild, almost conversational. The cake hasn't been served yet. A waiter materialized, clearing my untouched plate and replacing it with a slice of the 5-tier wedding cake, vanilla bean sponge with a raspberry reduction. I picked up my fork and took a bite. The icing was intensely sweet, sticking to the roof of my mouth, tasting vaguely of artificial vanilla extract and dust. It was terrible. I took another bite anyway. From the corner of my eye, I saw a blur of emerald green silk. Evelyn. My mother moved with the urgent, predatory silence of a shark navigating a reef. She slid into the empty chair next to me, bringing with her a sharp cloud of juniper gin and expensive jasmine perfume. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead at the dance floor, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. "What are you doing, Quinn?" she whispered. Her voice was a hiss, barely audible over the saxophone. "Eating cake." "Don't be insolent," she snapped, a tiny tremor in her manicured hand as she smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her skirt. "Your father made a joke. A toast. You making a spectacle by storming out and then slinking back in like a stray dog only proves his point. If you had an ounce of grace, you would have called a cab." I turned my head to look at her. Really look at her. Evelyn was beautiful, but it was a brittle, exhausting kind of beauty. The skin around her eyes was pulled tight, hiding years of quiet, desperate anxiety. I suddenly understood the tremor in her hand. She knew. She might not know the exact numbers, but she knew the estate was leveraged. She knew Thomas was bleeding out financially. She was terrified of losing the country club, the summer house, the status. For 28 years, I had craved this woman's approval. I had wanted her to look at me the way she looked at Beatrice, with pride, with certainty. Now, sitting inches from her, I felt nothing but a heavy, hollow exhaustion. "I didn't storm out, Mother," I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register that made her finally turn to look at me. Her eyes widened slightly, catching the strange, deadened shift in my tone. "I just needed to check my phone." "Your phone." She practically spat the words, always glued to a screen. "You are ruining your sister's night." "Beatrice's night is perfectly safe," I replied, taking a slow sip of my flat champagne. The battery acid taste was gone. It just tasted like cold water now. "She married Colin. He'll take good care of her. He's safe. He's liquid." Evelyn flinched. It was microscopic, a tiny contraction of her pupils, but I saw it. The word times, liquid times, hung between us, heavy and deliberate. Before she could dissect it, a shadow fell over the table. Thomas. He had abandoned the head table to do his rounds, pressing the flesh of the senior partners and managing directors he was desperately trying to keep as clients. He paused at table 14, looking down at me. The jovial, commanding aura of his speech was replaced by a cold, calculating annoyance. "Quinn," he said, adjusting his French cuffs. The gold cufflinks glinted under the chandelier. "I see you decided to stay." "I did." "Good. It shows a backbone. You need to learn how to take a hit," he said, leaning in, his voice dropping into that patronizing, father-knows-best cadence. "The real world doesn't coddle underachievers. Consider my speech a favor. A reality check." I looked at his shoes. Custom Italian leather, probably $2,000. I wondered if he had put them on a credit card he was paying 20% interest on. My chest tightened, a brief, violent surge of adrenaline flooding my veins. Part of me, the wounded, desperate child, wanted to stand up, flip the table, and scream the truth. I wanted to tell him that I was worth more than his entire struggling firm. I wanted to shove Elliot's text messages into his face and watch his smug, condescending smile collapse into absolute terror. But I didn't. Revenge, I was learning in real time, wasn't a screaming match. It was a silent, shifting tectonic plate. If I yelled, I was still playing his game. I was still fighting for his respect. I looked up from his shoes and met his eyes. "Thank you, Thomas," I said, intentionally using his first name. He blinked, thrown off balance by the calm detachment in my voice. He had expected tears. He had expected a fight. He hadn't expected absolute, terrifying apathy. Just, "Finish your cake." "Try to mingle," he muttered, quickly turning on his heel and walking away. I watched him go, feeling the weight of the last 2 decades slough off my shoulders, leaving behind a cold, clean, empty space. The night dragged on. I didn't mingle. I didn't dance. I sat in my corner, drinking ice water, watching my family perform their tragic play of wealth and perfection. At midnight, The double doors were propped open, and the crowd began to filter out into the warm, humid night air. I walked out alone, clutching my cheap faux leather bag, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone pavers of the country club's portico. The valet stand was a chaotic bottleneck of black town cars and silver European sedans. The air smelled of gasoline exhaust, damp earth, and the lingering scent of someone's imported cigar. I stood at the edge of the curb, handing my crumpled ticket to a tired-looking teenager in a red vest. "Just a minute, miss," he mumbled, jogging off toward the back lot. "Quite a night," a voice drifted over. It was Colin, Beatrice's new husband. He was standing a few feet away, his bow tie untied and draped loosely around his neck. He looked exhausted, the marble jawline softened by too much scotch. Bea was nowhere in sight, likely already tucked into the back of their waiting limousine. I looked at him. I had never really disliked Colin. He was just bland, a perfectly tailored suit filled with predictable opinions. "It was memorable," I replied. He let out a short, cynical laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Thomas went hard on you. For what it's worth, I thought it was out of line." "Did you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You clapped." Colin looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. "It's complicated, Quinn. You know how he is. You just have to play along. Keep the peace." "Right, the peace." I looked out at the line of expensive cars. "You know, Colin, you're a wealth manager. You look at risk for a living." He frowned, confused by the pivot. "Yeah, I do. You should look closer at your father-in-law's portfolios." I didn't smile. I didn't offer a dramatic pause. I just delivered the data. He's over-leveraged by about 40%. The mezzanine debt on his firm was called in today. If you tied any of your assets to his name for this wedding, I suggest you uncouple them by Monday morning. Colin stared at me, the alcohol suddenly evaporating from his system. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Before he could ask the frantic questions I saw forming in his eyes, the tired valet pulled my car up to the curb. It was a 10-year-old gray sedan. The passenger side door had a dent the size of a watermelon, and as the valet idled the engine, the fractured muffler let out a loud, obnoxious, rattling cough. It was a hideous car. I had never loved it more. I tipped the valet, a $50 bill, the only cash I had in my purse, and slid into the driver's seat. The cloth interior smelled like old coffee and damp paper. It smelled like my life. As I pulled the seatbelt across my chest, I looked in the rearview mirror. Thomas and Evelyn had walked out of the double doors. They were standing next to Colin, waiting for their Mercedes. Thomas was looking at my rattling car with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't wave. I put the car in drive and pressed the gas pedal. The muffler roared, an ugly, unrefined sound that echoed off the stone pillars of the country club. I drove down the winding, oak-lined driveway, the heavy darkness of the night swallowing the glare of the country club behind me. The steering wheel vibrated under my palms. I was 28. I lived in a basement. I was driving a metal death trap. And on Monday morning, my father was going to wake up and realize that the family disgrace owned the roof over his head. I turned onto the highway, merging into the sparse midnight traffic. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, listening to the rattle of the engine, the quiet hum of the tires on the asphalt, and the sound of my own steady breathing in the dark. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't heavy. It was completely, entirely mine. Thank you so much for experiencing Quinn's journey with me. Family dynamics can be incredibly toxic, and sometimes the best revenge really is a silent, massive success. If you related to Quinn's struggle, or just loved that ending as much as I did, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their worth, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deeply human, dramatic storytelling. See you next time.